everyone, welcome to the first of several videos that I'm calling the 5-minute review. These are short 5-minute review videos for the upcoming AP exam. This first one might be a little bit longer because of my brief introduction, but I will try my best to keep it under the 5 minutes. I am looking at the review packet that is put in your back of your second semester notebook starting on page 144. And gonna go through topic by topic and hopefully in 5 minutes give you guys a big broad picture of what the big ideas are, what are the format of some of these questions will be, starting with two that I'm combining: properties of water and the macromolecules. So I'm going to get this started, and like I said, I'll hope to keep this under 5 minutes, and then hopefully you can take 5 minutes out of your very busy schedules to start looking and reviewing for the AP exam. Starting with the properties of water, the biggest thing that you need to remember from this topic is that the properties of water are all related to its structure. So with water, you have hydrogen bonds that are forming because of an unequal sharing of the electrons between the oxygen and the two hydrogen molecules. So because of this unequal sharing, you get the slight positive, slight negative charges, and that structure is why water has some of those unique properties that are very important to life on Earth. Those positive and negative charges are going to allow water to form hydrogen bonds with other water molecules. And of the properties of water, the most important to life is that it's an excellent solvent. Remember that cells and their cytoplasm are made mostly of water, and so nutrients, waste products, there's going to be many solutes that are going to need to dissolve and be able to diffuse into and out of the cell. And so part of what's very important is the way that these molecules are going to interact or possibly not interact with water. You also have cohesion and adhesion, which is draws up water from the roots of the plant to the leaves where they are needed. You also can see how water being less dense when it's ice is very helpful to aquatic ecosystems that keeps the lakes from freezing over. And then your high heat capacity, your high specific heat, and your latent heat of vaporization, which helps with cooling. The high heat capacity will moderate air and climates near large bodies of water because of the ability to hold on and slowly release heat energy. Those are the big topics for properties of water. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the macromolecules. And the big thing to remember about macromolecules, because they are necessary to build new molecules, organisms are going to need to take matter from the environment and cycle it. So the big molecules that are involved, the organic molecules, number one, carbon. That is the most important because it is our definition of organic chemistry is based on carbon. But there's also hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur, which are used to build the big macromolecules. Carbon, we talked about how it cycles when we talked about the carbon cycle, and then we also kind of looked at how photosynthesis removes carbon from the atmosphere. Processes such as respiration, such as decomposition, cellular respiration, then put that carbon back in. We also looked over how that carbon cycle is being disrupted, and carbon is used to make all of the macromolecules. We also talked about nitrogen, and we also talked about how humans are interrupting the nitrogen cycle, the abiotic and biotic methods of removing atmospheric nitrogen, which is normally unavailable to organisms other than bacteria. We talked about how that cycles. We talked about phosphorus briefly. Our big thing about phosphorus is that it's not a gas, so it doesn't cycle as quickly. And because all our organic molecules, the macromolecules we talked about, all have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen present, we can use nitrogen and phosphorus to differentiate between proteins, and nucleic acids. So if an organism is placed in an environment where it's lacking in phosphorus, then that organism would not be able to make DNA. If an organism was placed in an environment where nitrogen was a limiting factor, then it would not be able to make proteins or nucleic acids because that's needed, those two elements are needed for those two macromolecules. We also talked about macromolecules just in general. We looked at how structure affects function. So with carbohydrates, we looked at cellulose, glycogen, starch, how that structure of that glucose makes a difference in whether it's digestible or not, or what organisms use it. For lipids, we talked about the structure of the phospholipid and the plasma membrane, with it being having a polar and non-polar region. We also talked about how structure affects function and the difference between fatty acids and unsaturated fatty acids, how they behave differently at different temperatures. And then in proteins, that was a big unit for us on how structure affects function. We talked about how the amino acid monomer has that R group in that central carbon along with the carboxyl and the amine group. And that R group, whether it's hydrophobic or hydrophilic, is going to affect how the protein or how the amino acid functions. And then we talked about the levels of protein folding, primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and we'll get into more of this when we talk about the central dogma. And then the last macromolecule we talked about were the nucleic acids. We definitely went into structure versus function and how DNA is different than RNA. And then we'll also go into more details later on in another review when we look at how the structure of that DNA, the anti-parallel strands, make a difference in how DNA replicates. Sorry this went over by a couple of minutes, but I just kind of as an intro, give you guys some background information on what the plan is. I hope this helped, and good luck studying.